Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're having a good day. Thanks again for tuning in to another video. In today's video, I just wanted to cover basically intro to knife making. So some of the tools you'll need, some of the items you'll need to buy, some of the preparation work you'll need to do to get started on your first knife, whether you're just wanting to do it as a hobby or a side gig or something like that. So I'll be covering all those things in this video, so stay tuned. All right, so as you can see here, I have a multitude of things on the table here. All of these things are pretty much basics of what you'll need to get started making your first knife. So the tools that you would need as a cheap option would be some files, something like this, like a flat file, and a set of round files. You will need some steel, obviously. 1080 or 1084 is what you want to choose for the easiest heat treatment when you don't have a expensive kiln. You would need something also to clamp it for when you're cutting or grinding your profile. So if you don't have a vise and you want the cheap option, just get one of these C-clamps. You could clamp it to whatever surface. Just be very careful. A vise is definitely safer, but you can do this if you're careful. Obviously wear safety gear and all that. The next thing is a way to cut it out. So you can either use a hacksaw like that or invest in a grinder like this to cut out your profile. You will need a way to heat treat your knife. This is how I started off heat treating right here, this setup. So this is 2 fire bricks that are hollowed out with one hole on the side, and then one of these MAPP gas torches. So basically it goes in there and you can heat treat your knife using this mini kiln. The other thing is a template or your design or model, whatever you want to call it. The best way to do this is get a piece of graph paper and draw your design, and then transfer that onto a piece of plexiglass like this, or a piece of Kydex or whatever. Glue it on there and then shape it, whatever means you have to shape it. And that way you'll have more consistent models or templates, whatever you want to call it. So that is a good tip. And then also I'm going to be going over some handle material selections and what you'll need for that. So this is the basic items you will need to get started. For handle materials, there are so many different options to choose from. It's part of the fun of it. You can really customize your knives. The 4 main that I work with would be G10, which is just this composite layered stuff. Very tough, very durable. And then micarta, this is just one type. This is canvas micarta. There's many types of micarta. And then you have stabilized wood. I think this is birch or something like that. And then you have resin and resin hybrids. So this is wood with resin. Those are the 4 main types. I'm sure there are many others, but micarta and G10 are your best options if you want something durable, something waterproof, something like that. But then wood obviously is a lot more beautiful and a lot more unique with its design and stuff like that. So those are the 4 main ones that I use. After you have a template that you really like and have it onto some sort of hard backing, as you can see, I just traced mine onto the steel with a Sharpie. So now you have a nice clear outline of where to cut to. So if you're really on a budget, you could use a hacksaw, a metal cutting hacksaw like this to cut out your profile. Now it would take a while. It's not the most efficient, but you can do it if that's your only option. I would definitely recommend investing in a grinder like this, an angle grinder with some sort of a cutting wheel. You can get cheaper ones at Harbor Freight. This one's a DeWalt, but that works really well for cutting the steel. If you don't have something like this is a Portaband. This is not that expensive. It's a Harbor Freight brand, and then I just made a little stand for it out of some wood. That works the best, but if you don't have that option, then there are other options as well. So I would normally cut out the blank with my Portaband saw, but I'm going to use this grinder just as another option and show how easy it is to cut through the steel. So here we go. So I'm already about halfway through. It really doesn't take too long to cut it out. So I'm going to finish cutting this out and then I'll be right back. So that took me all of probably 2 minutes to cut off that first piece. So as you can tell, it wouldn't really take too long to cut this whole profile out. So these grinders are really handy, especially when you start getting into higher like CPM steels and higher quality steels. Sometimes they're harder to cut through, so these things are very handy. All right, so as you can see, I got this profile pretty much all cut out. It took me about 10 minutes maybe. Not really too much issue with it. It is still a little bit warm, but there it is, pretty much cut out. Something I would definitely recommend against is dunking this blade in water. It is going to get pretty hot when you're grinding it, and if you dunk it and it's super hot, it could work harden it, and you don't want that, because we need to still drill some holes in here in the tang, and also we need to do the grinding, so try not to dunk it. So the next step would be to use a file and clean up all this area in here, and basically any part that you were using the grinder. I already cleaned up this portion here on my bigger grinder, but I will go ahead and file this and check right back. All right, so I went ahead and cleaned up the belly here with a file. Now there was one part that did work harden, and what I did is I just held my torch up to that area until you can see it got those colors kind of annealed it. So I got it to the point where I was able to file that area and it wasn't hard anymore. So if there is any parts that are a little bit hard from the grinding, then you can just do that and should be able to file it best you can. So as you can see, we did all of that just with these tools here. So pretty basic tools, and you already got your profile done. So the next part would be to drill the holes, which I did forget to mention in the intro part of this video, but you can do that with just any hand drill and some drill bits. So we will do that part next. All right, so as you can see here, I got my 3 pinholes. I laid these out using these just really cheap dial calipers from Harbor Freight, pretty cost effective, and then the centering punch from Home Depot. So all these things are things you can get at hardware or supply stores. So I'm gonna go ahead and drill these 3 holes with the drill, and then we're gonna go ahead and drill some weight reduction holes, and they're also double as places for the epoxy to grab onto. So the hand drill is definitely one way of doing it, but I would definitely recommend getting one of these cheap drill presses from Harbor Freight. It was like 150 bucks maybe, but it's going to give you a lot more consistent holes and more straight holes. So I'm gonna go ahead and drill the other two with this instead of the hand drill. So I got all of my holes drilled and the weight reduction holes as well. And you'll notice on these holes that I drilled, I also chamfered them with a larger drill bit. So I just went down very slightly into the hole with a larger drill bit, and that kind of reams it out and takes away any edges that the prior drill bit made. I also forgot to mention I'll be using 3/16 of an inch pin stock. This is just from Ace Hardware brass. So that is the size hole that I drilled in my blade. All right, so once you have your blade profiled and to the specs that you're satisfied with, I would definitely recommend knocking down any of the edges and burrs on the whole perimeter of your blade, because that could cause issues later with when we go to glue up the scales. So just take a file and just lightly knock down the burr on any of the areas that you did hand file. So once you have it profiled and the holes drilled, the next step would be to put the bevels on it, which you can see I've already drawn a line kind of where I want my bevel. I've also Sharpied in on where the cutting edge will be. I would definitely recommend getting some of this Dykem steel blue layout fluid. If you don't want to buy that though, you can just use a Sharpie and just mark up the whole edge. Then, if you don't have a center scribe tool or a dial caliper or anything like that, you can just use a drill bit that's the same thickness as your stock and put it down on a very level and even surface. This could just be like a kitchen countertop, like a granite surface. And you just take the drill bit and hold the knife in place and scribe a line on one side. You can flip it and do the other side if it's not exactly the same thickness of drill bit, but if you get one that's the same thickness, that works best. As you can see now, we have a nice line right in the middle where our cutting edge will be. So that is the edge that we will file or grind to. So we have our blade all ready for putting the bevels on it. If you are doing this on a budget, you can get just a cheap file like this, a flat file from Home Depot or Harbor Freight, something like that. You can also get a little bit nicer file. This is a Nicholson. Whatever you have available to you. Basically, what the idea is you are filing down to this line in the middle and up to this line simultaneously. So you're putting an angle on it and filing away material until you have a nice bevel that goes up to where you want it and down to this line simultaneously. So I will show how to do that. So I'm going to be using this little bit nicer Nicholson file. It does take a while to actually file away all the material. If you don't want to go this route and you don't have a grinder like that, I would definitely recommend getting a 1x30 grinder. You can get them at Harbor Freight. You could get one online. Definitely invest in something like that if you don't want to take the time to file it by hand. But if you don't want to spend the money, then you can definitely do it like this. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So here we go. And as you can see, I just have this clamped with a C-clamp. So again, pretty budget friendly. All right, so after just a little bit of filing, you can see I've already kind of started to progress this line down to the center scribe line and worked this line up, not very far, but it's getting, you know, closer to this line. So that's the idea with the file. I am going to actually finish this on my grinder, but if you had the time and the patience, you can definitely do it with a file like this one. So because I am going to be finishing out these grinds on my big grinder, I'm just going to probably heat treat this as is, and then I'll grind these later because that is an option when you have a bigger grinder, not so much when you're doing filing. So the next step would just be to file in a little sharpening choil right here. So all I'm going to do is clamp this up in the vise and then use a round file to file in that sharpening choil. Again, so all I'm doing with this cheap round file is just filing in a portion right here that will be basically a termination for where your edge will be. All right, so the sharpening choil is done. It looks about like that. Nice little termination place for the cutting edge. All right, so at this point we are pretty much ready for heat treat. We have the profile done, the sharpening choil in. If you weren't going to be using a grinder, you definitely want to have your bevels done on both sides, but I'm going to be doing the grinder. So we're ready to heat treat this blade, and I'm actually going to be heat treating this blade for the demonstration. This is actually 1084 steel, this is 8670. So because I'm demonstrating with this steel type, that's why I'm going to be using this blade instead of this one, so not to get confused on that. All right, so here's my setup for heat treating this 1084 steel. As you can see, there's not a whole lot that you need, but there are some things, so I'll go over that quickly. First thing is one of these Bernzomatic torches. I definitely recommend the yellow one. Seems to burn hotter. So we'll need one of those for heat source. And then just 2 of these fire bricks. All I did was hollow out the center and then put a hole in the side for the torch. It's pretty easy. It's very soft and easy to scrape out of there. It takes a little bit though. And then you will need some sort of a pliers. I'd recommend like lineman's pliers, something to grab the knife and pull it and push it into the forge. And then you'll also need a magnet. This is just like a welder's angle magnet. Works good. You will need some sort of quenching oil. I use this Parks AAA. I definitely recommend it, but you can use canola oil. I've used it. And then a meat thermometer to measure the temperature of the oil. You want the oil around 120 degrees. And then something to hold the oil. These ammo cans work good. You can get them at Harbor Freight for pretty cheap. And then this is just a hot plate to warm the oil. So those are the things you will need to heat treat this knife. All right, so I have the lights off in the garage here. As you can see, I'm just heating that blade portion with the torch. And those fire bricks help to retain some of that heat. So I'm slowly heating up the blade and trying to get it to somewhat of a cherry red color. So you can see it's starting to change color a little bit. So I'm pretty much just moving the blade back and forth along the flame to get a nice even color. You want the blade to be about a cherry red color. But the reason I have this magnet here is because once the blade reaches the critical temperature where you can quench it, it'll become non-magnetic. So I have the magnet sitting here, so I'll pull the knife out and check and see that it's still magnetic, so it's not ready. It is starting to get up to the color though that we need.
So we'll just keep going until it gets to non-magnetic. This mini forge does retain the heat pretty well, so it doesn't take very long to get the knife up to the temperature that you need. Your main goal is to try to get it as even as possible with the color of the steel. So you get it to about cherry red and then a little bit brighter, and it should be non-magnetic and ready for the quench. So I'm going to check it again. It's still magnetic, so we're going to keep going. All right, so now it's reached the point where it's not magnetic. So I'm going to leave it in there soaking a little bit longer, and then I'm going to quench it. All right, so I've just quenched the blade. And as soon as it's cooled, I will clamp it in my vise. All right, so I have the blade all clamped up in the vise. The reason I do that is just to let it cool and also to help keep it straight after the quench. So now is the time to test the blade portion and make sure the heat treat went well. And the way you do that is just with a file. On soft steel, the file will cut into it and you'll be able to actually file material away. With hardened material, as this should be, the file will skate off of it and not take away any material. So let's go ahead and try that. And as you can hear, it is very hard. There's even a sound difference between hardened steel and soft steel. So it has a kind of a higher pitch noise and it won't scrape away any of the steel. So we have success on the heat treat. All right, so the next order of business is to get this blade tempered, which if you don't know, it's basically you're slightly lowering the hardness of the steel, which also increases its toughness, because right now if you were to drop this on the concrete, there's a good chance that it would shatter. and obviously that doesn't make a good knife, so we want to make it a little bit tougher, and we do that by throwing it in the oven. But anyways, I would recommend getting this book, Knife Engineering by Larrin Thomas. If you're interested in at all about knife making or heat treating or anything like that, definitely grab a copy. In the back here, it has pretty much every heat treat recipe you could need. So if you flip to 1084 here, this is the recommended heat treat. It has the austenitizing temperature, which is basically what we did with heating up the blade before quenching it. And then it says fast oil quench, which is what we did in the Parks AAA, or canola oil if that's what you have. And then right here, the tempering temperature. So this recommends between 350 and 400. So if you look on the chart here, 300 to 450 is right in the middle is 375. And if we follow that up, that should give us probably a 61 to 62 on the Rockwell hardness. So I think I'll temper this blade at 375 for 2 hours, and then pull it out and then temper it again for another 2 hours.
All right, so here's the blade after it's been tempered for 2 hours at 375 twice. As you can see, I did put the grinds in it, the rough grinds. So this blade now is ready for final grinding and the handle and finish work. So I'm actually gonna make another video on that whole side of it because that is a lot in itself. But now this blade is heat treated and you have a workable blade that is able to make a knife out of. So stay tuned for the second video.